Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Damn Parenting Podcast, the show where we talk about parenting, identity, work, and all the existential side quests that seem to appear the moment you have children. I'm Eva, your host, and I'm really glad you're here. Now, a quick temperature check. If you're listening to this while walking a baby who refuses to nap anywhere but outside, or you're cleaning the house pretending it's me time, or you might be lying awake at 2 a.m. wondering why your brain chose this moment to reevaluate your entire life, welcome, you're in the right place. If you were here last week with my conversation with Rachel, the episode was about regulation, how to calm the nervous system, slow things down, and feel a little more steady in your own body again. Today's episode, it builds directly on that, because once things feel even slightly more regulated, that's often when clarity starts to knock. Not loudly and not dramatically, just a quiet question that shows up when life finally pauses long enough to hear it. Today's episode is about something many parents experience, but, well, they don't really have the language for it. It's that moment when you open up your laptop and, well, instead of motivation, your soul just sort of sighs. Or maybe you don't open up a laptop at all, but you still feel this. There's a quiet pull or a low hum of something here doesn't quite fit anymore. It's not a crisis, and it's not burn it all down and let's all move to Bali moment. It's just a thought that gently, but really annoyingly, keeps returning. There might be more for me, eventually, thoughts. But, well, look, before we go any further, it's a gentle note here about how to listen to this one. If you are walking a baby or folding your laundry or just running on fumes after another sleepless night, let this episode glide over you. Let it keep you company. But when you get the chance, later today or this weekend or, well, whenever life gives you a little quiet, come on back here with intention. Maybe with a pen or a notebook, and definitely with space to pause, rewind, and really notice what lands. Because this episode, it's not about quick inspiration, it's about reflection. And reflection deserves time. Context matters here. Many parents, especially mothers, experience major shifts after having children. You know, matrices. Even work changes and energy changes and values change. And here in the Netherlands, many women reduce their working hours or step away from paid work entirely during these big life transitions. Early parenthood, relocation, burnout, perimenopause. And while that choice is often practical and deeply loving, it can also quietly reshape identity, confidence, and how we imagine the future. So whether you are in a job that no longer fits, or not currently in paid work, or quietly wondering what you might want to build next, is it a business or a project or a creative path, or something that just doesn't even have a name yet? This episode is for you. My guest today is Ellen Johnson, the founder of Evergreen Coaching and Consulting. Some of you might recognize Ellen. She joined us late last year to share her birth story, an episode that stayed with many listeners for its honesty and depth. Today, she's back in a different role, bringing the work she does every day, helping people navigate transitions, values shifts, and the very human feeling of, well, being a little stuck. One of Ellen's clients described her like this, and honestly, I think it's perfect. Ellen has the patience of your favorite teacher, the trustworthiness of your favorite therapist, and the knowledge of the best supervisor you could have ever hoped for, all tied into one. Ellen helps people consciously shape lives and careers they actually crave, not just the ones that happened by default. And what I love about her approach is it's not about pressure, and it's not about overnight reinvention. It's about permission. Permission to notice, permission to question, and permission to change. Gently, thoughtfully, and in your own timeline. So if you're feeling regulated enough to get curious, but not ready enough to take action just yet, settle on in. This is a conversation about clarity, not urgency. So, Ellen, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Before we talk solutions, why don't we start with recognition? As you're known as the coach, I know you're a business coach, but this is kind of a bit of a melange that we have created here, especially for parenting, not just businesses. So let's just talk about the wake-up call, like the purpose, that aha moment some people have when they realize that their job doesn't match who they are anymore. And that's equal to being a parent where you feel like, is this all I am?
Absolutely. And it's something that's so, I think, relatable for people at any stage or in any sort of category, right? If you're a parent, if you are employed, if you're not, if you work for yourself, right? Like all of us have these moments where the change or the transition feels really overwhelming, or somehow we find ourselves somewhere and we haven't quite landed at any point, right? We're just in the middle of something new. So, something I like to talk to people about when they feel that sense of overwhelm or of questioning is that change itself is not really what we're struggling with, right? Like change is a situational event. What we tend to be struggling with are these transitions in our life, right? So we don't necessarily make space for the full process of what it means to arrive at a new identity, at a new experience. And therefore, we don't let go of what maybe we used to be, used to know about ourselves, what used to be our reality. We haven't really grieved that. And we also tend to be stuck in this kind of middle ground, this gray area that is so characteristic of a transition period. Like that's the real meat of a transition is this gray area where things aren't quite how they used to be. They're not quite in this, like, whatever this final state might be. And we don't really know what to do. There's a lot of uncertainty there. And that's where I think a lot of people and a lot of parents find themselves wondering, like, what am I doing? What have I done? What do I care about? Who am I? Right? Because you're untethered. You're not really, attached to either shoreline. You're floating in the middle of like, what is this new self and this new world that I want for myself, for my family? And sometimes we don't have a roadmap. Very often we don't have a roadmap for that. But it's so normal because it's something that is just inherent in the way change works, but nobody tells us that. So we assume like we have to have it all figured out and we should be on this, the other side of things. And that's just not really how it works.
So is there something that we can identify as an early sign of something being off?
Yeah. So, I think one of the things that is most instructive or helpful to check in with when we're feeling this sense of being untethered or feeling off is our personal values or our core values. That is something that I often start with when I work with someone, because it's not something that we think about very often, but it actually is kind of the core or the foundation of who we are. And when we're feeling so dysregulated or just far away from ourselves, it's usually because something in that space is not where we need it to be. And so we can talk a little bit about what that means, but just maybe in the simplest terms, like to check in with our values is a really helpful thing when we feel out of sorts.
And can I check, because many of us here obviously have moved here, sometimes by choice, sometimes following a job or a partner, whatever it might be. Do you notice that these wake-up calls tend to come after life, like the big changes, I guess, be it like the big move for the job or falling in love and moving here or having a child or two or three?
They absolutely can. Yeah, they can come after those big things. And I think what I find often with people is that many of us are so used to being in constant motion or in constant pursuit of the next milestone or the next thing we have to figure out, whether that be, okay, I brought my family here and now I have to figure out how to get them all settled in school, or now I have to get a new job, or now I'm having a second kid, or, all these things that are these big changes. We're kind of just like, okay, well, when that happens, then I'll do this. And we never really slow down long enough to figure out if any of this stuff is what we want, first of all, or if it's aligned for us and we're doing it in a way that actually works for us and for our family and for our career. And so I think actually sometimes it's in those in-between moments, as you said, when you kind of get quiet and you realize, oh, this is really uncomfortable, because we're so used to being in motion that it almost distracts us from the recognition of the fact that something is off. Also, something that can come up for people who, prior to becoming parents or still while you are already a parent, have kind of placed their own value in achievement or in needing to really excel. And so you start to really strive for the next promotion or the next sort of external recognition to feel valid. And because that's what you were taught to do, that's what you were encouraged to do. And at some point, many of us hit a wall where that's not fulfilling anymore, or it's not really working anymore. And again, that's maybe a signal that there's a shift in what we value.
So once that the awareness has landed, you've named that misalignment, I guess. What's next?
I mean, there's different ways to work with this, right? So we have to consider what might be resonant for you. But I think, something that can be really helpful is just to take a little space to actually check in with your own values and to evaluate for yourself where things are at for each of those things that you really care about. And you may find, and you and I have talked about this as well, that like sometimes we've outgrown things, or we've carried something from how we were raised, the way that our parents taught us or others in our life influenced us, that we have based ourselves around. And at a certain point, that's actually not serving us, or it's not the most important thing anymore. And so first and foremost, to be able to recognize what those things are that we shape our life around, but then also how we're currently embodying them, like being able to ask ourselves how those things are going, or if they're missing, or if I'm getting those. Am I giving them to myself? Are others helping me fulfill them? Am I getting them through my work if you're working, right? Just getting that sort of lay of the land can be a really important piece. And then, as you said, well, then what, right? Is we have to figure out, like, are those the right ones? Do we still want these ones, basically? And if the answer is no, starting to understand what is it that comes in its place, right? Like, what is that aspirational value, that thing that I want to move myself toward that might take me in a little bit of a different direction? And that can be a big thing to explore, even if you don't dive into what that means in a tangible way right away. It can still feel very confronting.
And one of the things you mentioned there was about, like, technically the work-life balance sounding like a myth, I guess, for a lot. I don't know if many of the listeners have seen, but there was a post recently where someone working for an American company had a phone call with their manager, who's based in New York, and it's a new manager. And basically that manager was making comments about, hey, I noticed you sign off Slack at 5:01. And hey, you don't respond to my emails in the evening. And hey, you didn't join this meeting at like 1 p.m. our time, which technically was 7 p.m. in the Netherlands. And that person correctly went back saying, I do my job because I'm not understaffed and I'm capable of doing my job. So that's why I can finish at 5:00. And that's the law here in the Netherlands. Is there is this myth of this work-life balance here in the Netherlands. But I also want to point out that it's also not just technically the paid work-life balance that we are addressing here, because this is also about mothers and finding the stay-at-home moms who kind of, are hitting this critical point as well of like, I feel like I'm not of value or I'm not worthy and I'm, who am I? Mm-hmm. And all I can keep thinking is like, you guys are doing the most important job. You're raising the future leaders and the future of our society, wherever you may be in the world. So let's talk about values. How do you guide people to rediscover what their values and priorities are now, and explain to us what values are?
Your values are the things that matter most to you, right? So that can be anything. It could be connection. It could be authenticity. It could be kindness. It could be creativity, right? It doesn't have to be on a list somewhere, right? Like, it's the stuff that you care about. And you have to think about, what your learning style is, what would help you to figure out what yours are, right? For some people, they don't want a whole complicated process. They just want to sit down with their journal and write out a couple words that come to them. And that is like, okay, I'm clear. These are my values. For other people, it might be nice to pull one of the free tools off the internet and to just search for like a list. And you can go through, this whole list of 50 words and start to narrow down bit by bit which things are really speaking to you. I also use this tool with my clients called the Live Your Values deck, which is a deck of cards that is beautifully illustrated. Each card has another value on it. And it's just a way to kind of tangibly, physically sort through it. And it's a more experiential thing. So it's another fun one if you want to have a more in-depth experience. But the most important piece is just that you start to zoom in on, I would say, 3 to 10 words that really speak to you and that feel like they represent where you're at right now. Okay. So it's important to have that starting point, even if we have some other aspirations, to first say, like, what is the baseline? Where is the starting point? And from that place to then be able to ask ourselves, how are these various values being fulfilled or not right now in my life? And I think that is where, as we say in the States, like where the rubber meets the road. It's like that's where the part of getting clear on whether we're feeling these things really happening in our world right now. And often that's where the stuckness or where the offness is. Because if you really value creativity and you haven't had a moment to do anything that feels creative to you in 18 months, then it's not that surprising that you don't feel so much like yourself, right? And it's a matter of just, first of all, being able to pinpoint some of those areas where you might need a little bit more space before you want to decide what you're going to do about that.
What would be the biggest obstacles, I guess, that you see, like the mindset, the money, the identity loss? Because I imagine it's not just, I don't know what I want. It's also, I can't afford to change, or my LinkedIn profile still says I'm that person back in 2016. So how can someone start pivoting gently without feeling like they're starting from scratch?
That's a really important question. I think one of the most important questions that I ever ask my clients is, what are you doing to contribute to this situation? Or what can you actually do about it? And I know that might sound counterintuitive because it sounds almost like it's blaming the parent. But I think what it's meant to evoke is this idea of like, what is in your control right now, right? Because there's so much that's beyond us. And sometimes we can make choices that could get us a different salary or a different amount of time with our kids or whatever it may be. But in order to start changing, we need something that's accessible to us today in the next hour, right? And so even if that is a tiny, tiny, tiny step toward a larger thing that we know we need to work on, what is most important is that we can actually begin. And we can only begin with something that relates to us or that is within our scope of influence. And so an image that I like to use with people who are feeling really overwhelmed by this sense of needing to make a change, but not really knowing where to start is I invite them to think about like a ladder that has all these, rungs that you climb up. But what's happening when you are feeling overwhelmed often is like you are picturing your larger goal. You're picturing this thing that's like a rung all the way above your head. There's nothing that you can step onto on this ladder. You're just like reaching into the air and you're like, how am I going to get onto this thing to even start climbing and start working toward the goal? Because what you've decided is like, I need a new job, or I need a different childcare, or I need whatever, right? It's the sort of larger enactment of the thing. But what we need to do to give ourselves a chance is to actually break that big piece into a whole bunch of micro pieces. And then you actually have a different ladder where there's tiny little rungs that you can step onto, just a couple inches or a couple of centimeters off the floor, so that you can then step onto the next one and the next one. And if we don't break it down small enough to actually get on the path, we will never start. And so that is a big, big piece of this is like, how can we pull it back and reverse engineer this larger idea into actual, tangible, doable things that we can begin? And then when we begin, we will have an opportunity to see for ourselves what might need to be the next step or the next step.
Okay, so if you're listening right now and you got a pen and paper, Alan, what's the one thing they should sit down and jot down right now?
I would think about what is one small piece of this that I can do right now, that I have the ability to control or start in the next day or the next week.
A lot of listeners here, they might have stepped out of the workforce. They might have had a career break. They might have become a parent. They might have had a burnout. And now they might be wondering, how do I go back without losing myself again? So Alan, when someone's ready to re-enter work, I guess, what will be the first steps to do it intentionally and not just a panic apply at 2 a.m.?
Well, first of all, there's nothing wrong with applying when you feel the motivation, whether it's 2 a.m. or not. But I think as you consider stepping back into that space, as you said, Eva, the gentleness is really key. So I would give yourself permission to feel uncomfortable. for the first while, even when the job begins, let's say, and it feels like, okay, we've accomplished it. We're doing it now. I'm a working parent or I'm back. In my experience, it takes a while to feel any sense of normalcy in that professional role again. And that is okay. So I think there's also just a piece of this, tactical stuff aside, that is about recognizing the reality of this transition is huge, and giving ourselves the grace to let it be messy and let it be a bit slower than we might hope, with the knowledge that it will ultimately start to feel better. It might not ever feel like it did before, but that's not necessarily the goal, right? Our goal is to find a way to blend the various parts of our lives, including our work, if we choose to work, so that it supports us and our families to live in the way that we want, to create the life that we want, right? So to be in alignment with the values, to be moving toward this thing that matters to us. And if you are able to work in such a way that can give you that, to me, that feels like the most important thing, even if it most likely looks different than how you were working before kids or before you had your last child or whatever it may be.
Very true. And speaking of which, what if the old field doesn't actually fit anymore? We know a lot of moms out there who have probably just quit their job. Once they became a mother, they realized actually it's not aligning with who I am. And maybe they're trying to fill it in with something that they needed when they were pregnant or once they had their child. And so they're now reinventing themselves with basically becoming a business owner and actually now providing a service to our community and our village here in the Netherlands. So how do you help them reinvent themselves without discarding their experience?
Yeah, that is so crucial, I think, especially if you're going to reinvent yourself or pivot or step into a space that is a little bit different from where you were in another part of your career, is that acknowledgement of what you're already bringing, what you're already good at, what you already know, because it can feel so vulnerable to start fresh. And especially if you're working for yourself, to have to wear all the hats and figure out all the business side of things too. That's a huge piece. But inevitably, you are bringing such a wealth of experience from your career to date and from your parenthood, frankly. I tell people this all the time. Like, what are the lessons that you've had to learn just by nature of managing a household or a child's schedule? Or, all of those pieces are super useful in terms of how do we manage our time? How do we prioritize? How do we keep things moving forward despite all the chaos around us, right? Like, you have a master's in that already, and letting that be an asset, I think is an important piece. And then I would also say you have to ask for help. That is a huge thing that I am centering for myself in my own kind of business vision for 2026, is like, I don't want to do it by myself. And that doesn't mean that I'm going to, suddenly make my one person business into a giant company, but it means that there are things that I already do that I don't have to do alone. Maybe I can run a workshop with somebody else, or maybe I can speak in a space like this instead of just going on Instagram by myself, or whatever it may be, right? So how do we connect and lean on other people, especially as you get started, to learn how they've done it, to not feel so alone? Like, those things are huge, just the way they are in parenthood.
So I do want to say one thing you just mentioned there about managing households, running logistics, managing financial budgets at home. I've seen people on LinkedIn put up, this is the job I had, and they listed out everything they did as a mom or a dad when they were staying at home on that break. And I'm like, these are beyond valuable, because it wasn't a case of we were trained by another manager. It was, we had to figure this shit out on our own. And it was our responsibility, and it was detrimental to us if we made a mistake sometimes. We really have to learn the hardest way. And it really is diving straight into that deep end once you've had a baby, because you are responsible for a life. It's not a brand, it's an actual life. And I really wish LinkedIn could really acknowledge this and just be like, yes, let me put your crown up there on you, and let's shine you on LinkedIn as a mom who stayed at home and raised your child for 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, however long it is, because every single day was so valuable in learning and surviving.
Absolutely. And I think too, as I've come back into work after having my baby a year ago, I have leaned into that new version of myself, to the matrescence, what matrescence has made me, right? And one of the huge benefits of that is being more decisive, being more clear on what matters. And I think in my previous career, even in running the same business I run now, but before my baby, I spent so much time and energy worrying about certain things or going back and forth about stuff that I just don't have space for now. And in some ways, I think that's a really huge asset to a person in a professional space, is to have that clarity, right? And some of that just comes from your experience of being a parent and the fact that you don't have as much space to waste anymore.
Absolutely. Time is of the essence. So listeners, if you've taken a break, what's one strength you gained during this time that you actually want to bring back into your next role? Just have a think of that one. Okay, so we found maybe a little bit of our alignment, or maybe we've just started, but life, well, it keeps moving. Our kids are growing, our priorities are shifting, and maybe new jobs are appearing, or we have created a new job for ourselves, a new business for ourselves. So once someone has actually found a better fit, how are they going to stay aligned? Like, what habits or systems help people avoid slipping back into old patterns?
Yes, this is such a key piece of maintaining what we've worked so hard to get to, right? And for me, the simplest answer is reflection. We need to carve out space to actually check in and make sure we're still aligned, right? Because we can sit down and do our values and look at that today. But if we never visit that again, even for a couple of minutes every few months or once a year, it's very easy to get caught and swept into the day to day, as we know, right? Into the constantly changing, always unpredictable nature of our lives, let alone whatever is going on at work. And so for me in my business, I do it for a half day or whole day. It doesn't mean you have to spend that much time, but I actually do kind of a quarterly review for myself where I just say, like, how is it going? And what am I proud of? And what has not worked well? And what is something that I'm going to focus on in the next couple of months, right? Like, I try to break it down for myself into chunks because, again, it feels too much to say, okay, here's my big goal for the year and just go, right? I just say, what did I want to do this last couple of months or this last couple of weeks? And did I do that? And why not? And so being able to sort of zoom out every once in a while can really help us stay on track. And we may discover in that reflection that we might need to pivot something, or that something has evolved and needs to change, right? Like, our goals and our values don't have to stay firm every year, every minute of our lives. We can, and we might need to change them as we learn more by going through life, by going through work, right? Like, the only way to know whether it's the right thing is to start, and then to be able to let ourselves pivot and change as we go along.
I love that. I hope you're not a hard manager now on yourself when you're having your quarterly reviews.
I'm pretty compassionate, I would say.
Good.
Yeah.
So do you think more people are finally starting to talk about career alignment, especially those moms and dads who are actually starting new businesses, which are more fulfilling to their values now as parents? Because, I mean, as you say, like, matrescence is such a massive shift in our entire being as a mom. And I'm sure as dads, they also go through something of not equal, I'm sure, but of similar strengths. But so many moms I've met here starting new businesses, are out there hustling away, trying to support our community and our village and trying to provide value for what they might have missed, what they needed, what they want now. Do you think we're actually getting somewhere here about career alignment, that, you know, there's more moms doing it? Or do you think we're just scratching the surface?
I think it's both. I think we're getting somewhere because I think it's, dare I say, a healthier way to live, right? To shape your choices and your career around what you care about and what your family needs, as opposed to these sort of larger ideals that maybe we were raised with about just, you know, the hamster wheel and just succeeding at all costs. I think that's a really good sign. And I think we're also just scratching the surface. I think there's a long way for us to go to keep building this in a way that works for each of us and that allows us to make enough money and to, you know, have our kids in care, right? I want to be real about all those factors being important to people. And especially when you start a new business, it can take some time to really have that be successful in the financial sense, right? And so I think there's a lot of room for us to keep building our careers in a way that serves us better and serve our families better. But I'm really encouraged by how much I have seen that and even have talked to friends who work in corporate jobs who are really reassessing how to make that work in such a way that actually aligns. And it's not always simple. And sometimes we have to step away or we need to look elsewhere. But I do think there is a slow shift happening in the world of work at large that's becoming more and more human.
One thing I do want to say is a massive shout out to all the moms out there who are starting their own businesses, because one thing I really do want to address is comparison. I think it's one of probably the most evil things we can do to ourselves. And comparison, as I always say, is the thief of joy. Because as you say about your ladder, each rung, it doesn't have to be really high if we can just do it step by step. And the comparisons of our knowledge and our skills that we've already had ourselves from our previous businesses are all different. And I learned it the hard way. I think it was about 4 years ago, I joined a mastermind group kind of with Linda from the Science Camp. And she was building the science camp and I was building my previous business that I was trying to set up. And we talked and we had these amazing like discussions and we were like championing each other. We were there for each other and she's completely excelled and she's doing super well. Meanwhile, my business is folded because, well, blasting Deans, but never mind. But it was when I was sitting down and I was like, we were having a chat one day and I was like, yeah, I mean, like, I really still believe in it. Like, I really want to do this. And she turned around and she was like, yeah, but you had a baby. Your baby wasn't even 1. You started this business when they were 3 months old. My child is 10. And I was like, but I still can do it. And she was like, yeah, be compassionate towards yourself. You have a young child. Be there with the child. Be in the moment. She's already had that moment. She started this business when the child was much older. And it was a huge awakening for me. And so for anyone out there who's starting a business or is in the early years of it, just be compassionate about it. I really loved your idea of the quarterly review where it's not just a case of how's business, am I making money or whatever, but it's just how am I doing? And also it's not about competition in our sphere, for example, but it's about collaboration and working together. I mean, you're always welcome on the podcast. Everyone's always welcome on the podcast because let's share our stories. You know, let's talk about this. So for everyone listening, it's been a lot. We're in the middle of January right now. We've had Christmas and I mean, it's been a lot. And we've had a lot of bad weather and school closures and everything else. So if you are listening to this in January, first of all, congratulations, because you've made it through another year of juggling things. And maybe now as the calendar resets and everyone's talking resolutions, you're not looking for the new you, but maybe just a more aligned one, as Ellen was saying. So Ellen, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. And I want everyone to know that myself and Ellen have actually designed up some Instagram reels and carousels and whatnot. So please do head over to Instagram to find these. And maybe you're feeling the quiet nudge that something's off, like your work or your values and your lifestyle just aren't quite on the same page anymore. Take this time as your moment to pause, not to blow up everything and move to Bali, you know, as I said, unless you're actually already Googling Bali co-working visas. But, you know, let's just get curious. So ask yourself, what part of my work no longer reflects who I am today? What would make me feel more aligned? Not in 5 years, but maybe in 2026. Because alignment, it doesn't happen by chance. It starts with awareness. If you want a bit of guidance on this journey, you can find Ellen and her work at evergreen/cc.com. She's exactly the kind of person who helps you reconnect the dots between what you do and who you are. Ellen, thank you again so much for joining us and for reminding us it's never too late to design a career and a life, as a parent especially, that actually fits us. And to everyone listening, if this episode resonated with you, share it with someone who's also questioning what are they doing next. Let's make this year less about the new year and new you and more about a real year and a real you. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and stay a little bit damn real.